Oh, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. Hopefully give you a fun-filled hour and definitely a data-packed and hands-on packed hour. I'm Patrick Meenan. I run WebPagetest, and recently, probably about a month ago, came over to Google to be able to work on it full-time. And you'll actually see us contributing quite a bit more to the project. So hopefully what you see here is just sort of the beginning of web performance in general. I'm going to go through a really brief overview. Hopefully most of you are familiar with it, and then dive right into sort of the 202, I'd call it, of web performance analysis with WebPagetest, and hopefully some new stuff that you guys haven't seen before. I'll pause at a couple of points in the presentation for questions, hopefully some good points, and we'll go ahead and get started. So really quickly, WebPagetest, if you're not familiar, webpagetest.org. You can go in, throw in your URL, pick where you want to test from. One of the key things that you'll get is from the physical location all over the world with realistic end-user connectivity, which is really important given last mile latencies generally drive web performance a lot more than back-end. Really easy to consume. You just go there, you throw in your URL, and you get your results back. Generally, it was originally targeted at front-end developers with a lot of detailed HTTP knowledge. It's sort of expanded from there and gotten to the point where developers use it, business owners use it, people who hired other developers use it to sort of gauge where they need to go with the applications. Really quick overview on where it's from. The locations have spread. Most recently, we've gotten coverage in Moscow, so really good. This is all driven from the community and the partners. I only run the ones out of Dulles in India, so what you're seeing here is the web performance community coming together to give you the testing tools you need. So let's dive right in. At a really high level, you put in URLs, you get results back. The results you get back, generally, you get some high-level optimizations, your page speed scores, you can download some raw data, and sort of the golden nuggets for me are generally the waterfalls. So I threw out on Twitter to see if anyone was interested in subject pages for us to go over. Well, you can't do a web performance talk without beating on CNN.com a little bit. God forbid they actually improve the site, and we won't have anything to talk about anymore. Gastropod.com asked me to take a look, as well as lonelyplanet.com. And then news.com I threw in there because that's a site I visit on a fairly regular basis, and figured I'd show that it's not just the small sites that can benefit from doing some of these things. One of the key things, especially if you're trying to sell or understand what the actual user experience is like, is how the page feels to a user, and the metrics don't usually do that justice, and we'll see that shortly. There's been sort of the easy UI for selecting and comparing visually multiple sites against each other, but in the advanced settings area on the main page, there's also a video tab where you can capture video from any location for any config and while setting any of the other advanced options, and we're going to be using that extensively today. The other, and this is the key thing I wanted to cover today, in addition to some light coverage on, is the king. I don't think it gets enough usage because I don't know that I've talked enough about it, but it's incredibly powerful for letting you see what-if scenarios without having to actually change the site itself. I can't tell you the number of times that people say, yeah, my site's slow, but it's because of the ads, or yes, my site's slow, but the Facebook widget's slowing me down, or widget X is slowing me down. And whether you're the site owner or you're the widget creator, having the ability to prove whether or not that's. So what this lets you do is you go in and you can put in a list of substrings to match on, and any requests that match those subbed from the page, the browser never even tries to load them. Can't guarantee it won't break the page. Sometimes it does. Usually it doesn't, depending on how well your site reacts to things not loading successfully. But it lets you knock out content and see what the impact is on the user experience. So we'll dive right in and hop straight over to live data. So CNN.com, here we have the test of the page itself actually loading. 16 seconds. More importantly, the start render time in the 6-second range. I don't know if many people have looked at sort of the CNN waterfall, but it's sort of the classic case of lots of stuff loading in the head, blocking serially. So figured it would be useful to see, okay, let's say they went in and they managed to fix all of the JavaScript. But let's say we load the JavaScript asynchronously and we invest the dev effort to do that. What would the impact to the end user be? So we can go ahead, and when we do, in this case, I just blocked a .js, which was, you can pick any string. .js is generally an easy one to pick, as long as you don't get any artificial matches for other content on the page. And everything that was loading in the head's now not loading. And the load times dropped from 16 seconds down to 5 seconds. And more importantly, the start render time dropped down to 1.3 seconds. Okay, well, the metrics are all nice and good, but what does that actually look like? And what does the page look like with all the JavaScript blocked? So that's where the visual comparison comes in really handy. And you can see side by side when you do the film strips. As you scroll, the bottom one is with the JavaScript blocking. And you can see at 2 seconds you started to get the CNN header. At 2.5 seconds you actually started to get the article content. 3.5 seconds you actually got the images for the articles. And at 5 seconds, everything that was rendering has finished. And way out here at 8 seconds, the actual production site that's loading all of that JavaScript, everything just sort of popped on the screen. There's no progressive rendering of any kind. And out here, way out here, so all the way up until 11 seconds, it still looks exactly like the page with the JavaScript blocked. At 11.5 to 12.5 seconds, the third image loads. So that's what's being impacted by blocking the JavaScript is the final image. The deck will be available after the presentation, as well as the links to all of these. So on the odd chance that you can't see the film strip, or as I'm about to play the video, if the video doesn't come across on the screen sharing well, you're welcome to go back and look at it later as well. So when you're selling things to the business, the film strip's really helpful, but nothing sells like the videos. So you can do the side-by-side, what did it actually feel like to the user? And you can see, wow, the no JavaScript loaded, it's done. That was a great experience. This poor guy that has to look at the production page, on the other hand, that was really painful. Okay, so CNN's sort of the poster child. We know there's a lot of things that they could do, but is that a common problem? GastroProd was actually a fairly fast site. You've got load times of 3 seconds, render times of 2 seconds. This was a community-provided site that he wanted me to take a look at. The one thing that jumped out at me, so there are 2 JavaScript files in the head and a font that's being downloaded for this site. So I figured, okay, so let's see what the impact would be if we blocked, or if we could make the JavaScript asynchronous, and if we didn't use downloadable fonts. So we went and ran a test of the site, blocking the EOT and the .js files, and the load times improved pretty significantly, and more importantly, the start render times also improved, got cut in half. One thing, when you're looking at the film strips, it usually picks a scale for you. If you're looking at a fast loading site, sometimes it's more useful to look at the 100 millisecond resolution on the images. So the no loading of the JavaScript and the font, the page content all just sort of popped in at 1.6 seconds, and the logo filled in at 1.8 seconds. And everything, for the most part, that was going to load is complete before the production page loaded. Now, if you pay really close attention, you can see that the menu area pretty much broke without the JavaScript and without the downloadable font, not to mention the actual fonts and the page layout, which you'd sort of expect. So that also lets you know I'm not generally a huge fan of using JavaScript for UI. Generally like to do progressive enhancement where you have your UI that can stand on its own and then you add functionality with JavaScript. This lets you know sort of what parts of your site are dependent on the JavaScript working. And with another visual comparison, you can see both are pretty fast, but it's still a much more instant, much more popping experience for the JavaScript being blocked. And, sorry, just... Okay, Lonely Planet was the other one, and this one actually gets to be the other community-provided site. This one provides a whole lot more experience or opportunity for playing with knocking stuff out other than just the JavaScript. If you'll notice, when you go to lonelyplanet.com, at least from the US, you get a 302 redirect to a /US version of the site. It loads some external resources. And then, interesting one here is it does a connection SSL to secure.lonelyplanet.com to check your sign-in status. And that looks really expensive, and it's before this green line here is the start render. So if you're at the company that builds lonelyplanet.com, you might say, okay, so is it worth it to invest the dev effort to get rid of the redirect and to knock out the sign-in check and figure out a way to do that asynchronously? Maybe don't bother doing the sign-in check if a given cookie is not set, for example, because there's definitely no cookies set when WebPagetest visits your site. So let's see what it looks like when you knock out just the redirect and the security sign-on check. Well, this is great. The start render time went from 3.5 seconds down to just under 2 seconds. And with minimal effort, I would imagine, for just doing a simple cookie check and not doing the sign-in check if a cookie's not set. It's probably worth the ROI to do the dev effort. Let's take it sort of a step further and see, okay, let's block the JavaScript on the page to see, okay, if we were going to take the JavaScript and make it asynchronous or load it after the page loads, well, we knocked the start render time down to just over 1 second now. So that's probably worth the effort as well. And we'll see in a second what the visual impact on the page is, if there is any. Odds are means fixing some inline scripts and dependencies. And we'll take it a step further and block all of the ads on the page. So we already improved the page load time pretty significantly. From the overall page load time from 11.3 seconds down to 6 seconds, just by a couple of minor tweaks to the site itself. And all of this just from straight testing without actually having to modify site code. We'll take it a step further and go, okay, ads are the typical blame. What are ads doing to my site? They're making me slow. So the ads, if we knock them out, took us down to from 6 seconds down to 4.9 seconds. It's impactful, but not nearly as impactful as the other changes to the site. And it had marginal impact on the start render time, probably about 100 milliseconds or so. So we'll take it and we'll go and we'll see the visual aspect of how the pages load. And we sort of, from top to bottom, we have the everything in lonelyplanet.com. We have the, okay, what does it look like just without the redirect and without the authentication check? Also with JavaScript block, and then finally with the ads blocking. So as you'd expect, it gets faster as you go down, but you can see even with the JavaScript blocked and the authentication check blocked, the page is essentially fully loaded at 3 seconds before the production page even starts to display anything to the user. And way out here at around 5.5 seconds, everything is complete, and it functionally looks exactly like the page that loads the JavaScript. The only thing that you don't get right away is the rotating main image, but that's easy enough to, you don't need to load your JavaScript in the head to be able to do that. So it looks like it would actually be a fairly low dev effort for Lonely Planet to move the JavaScript out of the head and potentially even make it asynchronous and get the full benefit of going all the way down to the 6-second load times and the slightly over 1 second start render times. And way out here, I'd say probably the 9.5 seconds is the more useful visual indicator that matches what looked like it loaded in 6 seconds with the stuff blocked. And then, of course, you need to take it up to the management and sell them on it. So you put together your video. This one's a little crowded with all 4 in the same video. And you go, hey, the user experience could be this fast with just, say, a month's dev effort. And way up here on the top left, that's what our users are experiencing right now. We could make tons more money, we could serve more ads, and everyone would be happy. And the final one I wanted to walk through before, we'll take some questions right after I do the news.com walkthrough, which is, high volume published site, giant teams behind it doing the dev. Not too bad. The start render time just over 2 seconds. The page load time just under 8 seconds. But they are loading a couple of JavaScript files here in the head. Be interesting to see, okay, what does news.com look like without the JavaScript loading in the head? And we can shave a full 800 milliseconds off of the start render time just by making moving the JavaScript out, potentially asynchronously or bottom of the page, something along those lines. On a visual aspect, and this is actually a really good one for showing you why the start render metric, while interesting, doesn't say everything, because a big giant gray background image, I don't a lot. What they really want to see is the article content. So it really is important to see visually how you're presenting. In this case, yeah, the start render time improved by about a second, but much more importantly, the content loading loaded at 2.5 seconds instead of way out here at 4 seconds for the production page. And effectively at 3.5 seconds, it looks like visually the page is done. And it looks exactly like the page with the JavaScript loading. So the effort for moving the JavaScript asynchronously, moving it to the page, shouldn't break news.com, and it shouldn't be that painful to do for a giant user benefit. Of course, you're on video for selling it. It's like all of that just for moving the JavaScript. All right, wanted to take a brief break for that and take some questions and see pretty quickly. So I'm sure there's some questions about the tests themselves, how things were done, that kind of thing.
I don't know that we have questions about the tests themselves. You did answer the ones about how JavaScript is blocked. So Danny had a good question. He said, what's the best metric to show your ISP that it sucks?
So generally, if you're going to have a server performance problem, it's going to be your first byte time. Your base page is you can't guarantee. Poorly written applications, even on a well-performing server, might have a long first byte time. But generally, if your hosting provider is overloaded or they can't perform well, you're going to see it in your first byte time for your application. Particularly something like a WordPress blog or something that isn't just a simple spit out the HTML that interacts with multiple backend systems.
Oh, okay. And then Faran, I probably mangled that name, had a good question about, he would like to know how the JavaScript is blocked. He would just like a quick explanation of that. The mechanism by which the JavaScript is blocked on the page.
Right. So, and I think I saw some questions flying around about inline JavaScript. So you have the ability to block requests. You can't necessarily block inline content, and what you're doing is you're looking at the URLs for any of the requests that you want to block, and you're finding something unique in that URL file name, and the site's using .js extensions for all of their JavaScript. You can just put in a block string of .js, and any request on the page that any URL has a .js somewhere in it, that request will get blocked and the browser won't load it. So it really is, the granularity level is at the request level, and if you're combining 20 different JavaScript files together into a single request and you're trying to block say just jQuery or just a piece of that JavaScript, you don't have that level of control, unfortunately. It does let you block, one of the convenient things, if you want to block the Facebook requests, you could just put in facebook.com thing for Facebook.
Okay, that's pretty clear. Donna had a good question. How much performance impact does this tool have on the site? Is it safe to use it regularly in a production environment? So
the tool itself is just like a user loading your page one time. Each time it tests. You can, on the public version, you can run up to 10 tests at a time, first and repeat view. So at most 20 visits to your site over 5-10 minutes. If you run an internal, so all of WebPagetest is open source, and you can install your own install of WebPagetest behind your firewall or anywhere you want and pretty much do anything you want with it. And we'll get in a little bit, there's an HTTP API for talking to WebPagetest, so you can script something that submits tests every 5 minutes if you want to hit against your production site. And at some level, you want to make sure that you're not over-testing your site. There's also an open source project built on top of WebPagetest called WPTMon, which will take care of doing the scheduling and trending of the results for you, if you really do want to sort of run your own metrics and monitoring system. But generally, the one-off testing has no impact on a web server, and the instrumentation for measuring all of the performance and the requests and all of that kind of stuff doesn't impact the page load time itself. It's all very, very light instrumentation. It is, what you're measuring is specifically a user on the type of connectivity on IE from the location that you selected, though. So do be aware that it's sort of a one-off sample.
Okay, and Mark was asking what the gold border around some of the snapshots was indicating.
Yes. Border tells you when something on the screen changed. the black bar down at the bottom got added. If there's no gold border between frames, like all of these are actually nothing changed on the screen. The display.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. I think they're quick, and then we can move on. I don't even know how to pronounce Sorab's name. Forgive me. Is asking, is there a way to change the host header so you can test straight to or without using my CDN?
Yeah. Well, so I guess it's going to depend on which host headers you need to modify. I'm going to touch on the scripting in a little bit, but I'm not going to get into that level of detail, so it's probably worth answering now. There's a couple of things you can do with the scripting. WebPagetest supports a scripting language down here in the script tab, which has a bunch of even more advanced commands than the advanced settings. Most of them are for interacting with a page, doing a multi-step login. So NS settings, and those are probably the most useful ones. So instead of using your CDN, if your web server knows how to handle requests for, say, cdn.webpagetest.org, you could just repoint cdn.webpagetest.org to the IP address of your server. And have it serve all of the requests. One of the main uses for that is also if you want to test something like AOL.com, but you want to test your development version, you can repoint the IP address of AOL.com to point to whatever you're trying to test.
Okay, and one more quick question.
And there are
actually
samples.
Have several more, but I only want to move. Oh.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Patrick. Oh, okay, sorry.
No, you can
Marcus,
go ahead and ask the question.
Maria. Okay, is it possible to test pages that require authentication, username, password?
Yes. So there are two forms of authentication generally. If a site's protected behind basic auth, you get the sort of the ugly gray dialog asking you to log in with a username and password. You can just put in the credentials into the auth tab here in the simple UI. I do ask you to not expect that those credentials could never get hacked, so please be careful with anything you put into WebPagetest. I prefer you not test like your banking account, for example. The scripting will let you interact with an HTML-based authentication system. You can either, for a session that you authenticated elsewhere and just drop it directly in, or you can do the full navigation path of going to an authentication login screen, entering the credentials, hitting the submit button, and going wherever you wanted to go from there. We actually use the scripting language to test applications like a webmail application, for example, that requires even more interaction where you log in, you click on a mail, you read it, you compose another mail and send it, that kind of stuff.
I think we should move on now, if you're ready.
Alrighty. Yep. So sort of jump. Actually, it's a perfect segue into the scripting. So the scripting interface is both for automating richer applications, whether it's form-based logins or interacting with richer applications. One common use case is testing a navigation flow. They go to my portal page, and then they go to they click on an article page from there. for testing things like the reuse and the cacheability of your CSS and your JavaScript across your pages, rather than testing everything as just a silo of a single site. You can also execute arbitrary JavaScript as part of the script. One of the things that we did recently was load a image search results page, for example, and then every second down page. And that was just a simple set timeout scroll in JavaScript. So even beyond sort of what the scripting language can do directly, you can also and then beyond the interacting with the rich applications, you've got sort of the advanced capabilities which are in the UI, and then the really freakishly advanced stuff that not a whole lot of people figure out a good way to put in the UI that you do it. Right, the DNS lookups to point traffic either to a whatever. You can override the DNS server that's being used for the DNS lookups. You can provide custom user agent strings. You can set cookies. And even more recently, WebPageTest exposes a window.webpagetest object on the DOM that you can use to log events to, or you can explicitly set call a done method on it from JavaScript. And in the script, you can say, hey, wait till the page tells me it's done. That's for sort of really fringe cases where you have no other way of measuring when you want to be done. And threw together a really quick script and this is basically as simple as it gets, that goes to Amazon.com, does a product search for a book, and opens up the product page. So you can sort of see how each step progresses, and you can record video for it and do the full sequence. So sort of two key things for when you're doing the scripting through the WebPageTest interface. The UI in WebPageTest is only really good at providing you one result to look at. So you have a choice. You can either combine all of the steps in a script into a single transaction, and that's what this combine steps command does at the beginning of the script. Or you can choose to record data for just one of the steps. In which case, let's say I wanted to navigate to Amazon.com, do the product search, and then only record the data for after I did the product search, how long did it take to be interested in. You could enclose the first two navigate commands with a log data 0 to turn it off and a log data 1 to turn back on the recording of data. And this is all linked to, in the scripting tab, there's a link that takes you to documentation for the hosted scripting, which provides samples as well as explains some of this stuff. And we will go. So this was a combined one which took all of this transaction. We can see and when you look at the waterfall, you'll get, okay, the top part of the waterfall was the load Amazon.com. Then there's going to be a 2-second gap generally between the steps, which is really WebPageTest waiting until it knew the previous step was complete. Take that user thing or the time user to end it. The product search, which happened right after that, and followed by the of the product page. You do the single step. You can also record video. So you get the film strip for the full sequence. We've got it at 2 seconds. The main product and the menus started to load on Amazon.com, and you've got the other stuff filling in. Then over here at 9 seconds, you can see where we started to do the product search off of the main page. And you can even web the other books from Steve and O'Reilly Media. And then at 16 seconds, you can see where we started to actually. You can create a video. If you wanted to compare one flow to another flow, you could still do all of the same stuff that you do with the videos for the comparisons and that kind of stuff. It's interesting to see the flash of white between the search listings and going into the product page. That's potentially an area for improvement in UX. All right, so I think that's the scripting. We'll pause really quick question to see if there are any questions on the scripting. I have one or two more topics to cover, so we've still got a little bit of time if there were any questions, since I sort of a crazy amount of stuff that you can do there. And please ping me if you're going to be doing scripting or you have any questions, because there's a lot of trial and error, especially when you're automating a site that you don't own, and figuring out, okay, if I want to sign, do I send a click event to the button? Do I send a click event to the div that contains the button? There's usually a lot of trial and error in getting an application to work. And one other key thing I forgot to mention is the scripts are tab delimited. So like in here, between navigate and the URL that you want to navigate to is a tab. If you get an error back in the UI saying that it's an invalid script, 9 times it's because there are spaces instead of tabs. And hopefully within the next week or so, I'll have some code that can automatically convert the spaces to the tabs intelligently to eliminate that. Go ahead and dive into any questions on the scripting.
Okay, Pat. Renato is asking, could you run the same test again after applying the suggestions, that is compressed JavaScript, for example, to measure the time that you've saved? We have a bit of latency, so.
I think I closed the Amazon window, but I'll open, give you a sneak peek into the next page. We were recent addition, the rerun the test button on the test result page, which lets you another test for, which is probably the best way if you want to go ahead and improve a site and test exactly what you had tested before, especially if you're doing a script. You don't have to worry about making sure that you still have the script around and that nothing with the script itself changed. So it keeps all of the parameters of the test the same, the location, the number of runs, whether you're capturing video or not, the script, and just resubmits it for you to compare to your previous data.
That's great. We have a couple other questions. I don't think they're specifically related to scripting, but I will ask them quickly. Mark wanted to know if you have plans to have a web on mobile performance.
Yes. So it's jumping a little ahead, but for the what's coming, we're first going to focus on adding non-IE browsers. So you'll see Chrome and Firefox support getting added, but very, very, very high on our wish list, and we're going to implement right after we get other browsers implemented is mobile, an actual mobile device, probably Android, and not just because I work at Google, but because you can, if you want, build your own browser or your own version of the browser and instrument what you need, and it's a lot harder to do on a completely closed platform. So I expect Android will probably come first, and then we'll see what we can do about iPhones. Definitely only smart devices. We'll see. I haven't made a decision yet on whether it's going to be on Wi-Fi or on a carrier network. It's nice to have a carrier network to see the increased latency. However, it also introduces a lot of variability that you wouldn't get if you were on Wi-Fi, so it might make sense to offer both. But yeah, mobile on actual mobile devices with actual mobile browsers is a huge item on our list because there's no real good ways to measure that right now.
Well, that's exciting. So Jeff has another question. Awesome. That's right. Jeff has a question. When to use JMeter and when to use WebPagetest?
So, I may be dating me a little bit, but as far as I know, JMeter is very much a curl style, fetches an HTTP request and lets you, it's really good at load testing a backend, for example. Whereas WebPagetest is much more of the user. It loads all of the resources on the page. It'll load the ads. It'll load your kind of. If you want to know what the user experience is, you're going to want to do something that's based on a full browser, whether it's WebPagetest or one of the commercial services out there. If you're trying to load test your application, is generally where you're going to be doing JMeter, or you want to test, even if it's not load testing, but just get a distribution of what the performance is just on your base HTML, your application code itself. It's useful to use things like JMeter.
Okay, from this section, so carry on.
Alrighty, and let's go back. So one of the other things I wanted to drop in, which has saved my bacon more than once, is the Dynatrace Ajax edition. If a free profiler for Internet Explorer, it's one of the best profilers I've seen, and we've got integration with it for WebPagetest, where there are in Dulles there are special, actually instead of locations, I think it's actually the browser selection, where from IE6 to IE9 there are also special browser selections labeled IE7 Dynatrace and IE8 Dynatrace, which will run a Dynatrace profile on your site and give you a downloadable version of the trace file for you to analyze, about being able to reproduce the WebPagetest performance data locally. You can get it with the browsers that WebPagetest is using from WebPagetest's location and do the offline analysis at your desk. And I picked on AOL Autos just because it's one that I've looked at before. We've used Ajax, the Dynatrace Ajax edition, before to help us find hotspots on the page. You'll get a couple of links right below next to each waterfall. One is to download the Ajax edition itself. The top one is to download the capture file. When you download it directly in, you can. It'll ask you to name the session. And then it'll load it straight up. They've got a bunch of grades and stuff that they give, but for me the most value comes in, and specifically this JavaScript line, where you can see, I believe that line is, you can chunk of, so anything that's blue. Down here are all the network requests. You can see this giant chunk of JavaScript execution on load that it'd be nice to find the culprit for and improve. And forgive me, that doesn't do this justice, but down here it'll tell you the hot spots on what's taking the most amount of time to execute. And then you can actually get a call stack in here. So it's getting the offset width of the DOM elements. Looks like it's getting called 15 times. It's like, okay, that's interesting, that's expensive, but what is doing it? And it looks like here in the API, it'll tell you the call stack of how it's getting to the DOM. And it looks like jQuery is talking to the DOM, jQuery is talking to itself. Something's calling jQuery. Okay, it's this code, which... Okay, it's not going to agree with me in the low-res UI. It's the color box widget that's being used. Here we go. 7 jQuery color codes in, and it's the init code. And right here, you can tell the jQuery ready. So the color box is attached to the jQuery ready event. It's a little unfortunate. Basically, all of the examples for JavaScript libraries attach the handlers to the ready event, which is sometimes it's before the page even renders to the user. So anything you're running there is going to impact the user experience. And in this case, it's executing 1.1 seconds worth of JavaScript for this color box to initialize. If you want, you can debug, and they'll prettify minify what it's actually doing, or you can just go back to the color box developers and ask them to improve the site. It could be that 9 times out of 10, what happens is you've got an inefficient selector that you're specifying. So you'll use like a class-based selector on a DOM that has 20,000 nodes or 100,000 nodes on it, and it's having to iterate over the entire DOM to find the things. In this case, that doesn't look like the case, but either you're using the color box incorrectly or the color box itself is inefficient, and maybe it's worth looking what value do we get by using it, and is there another more efficient solution to do what we need to do? And literally it took 10 seconds to get directly into the hot spots, which is why I love this tool. Usually when you're looking at a waterfall in web page testing, you'll see like a gap between network events. It's like, oh my God, what's going on there? It looks like it's not doing anything. Down at the bottom of the waterfall, you'll be able to see the CPU spiking because it's executing JavaScript, but what is it? And this is easily to be able to drill into that and give you sort of the fault, and obviously you have to do the actual dev work after that to figure out what's going on. But it's a huge help in pointing that out. And that was it for this part. Were there questions on the Dynatrace integration before I sort of do the really quick where we're going with the roadmap and that kind of thing?
A couple people asked, and it was seconded. They wanted to know what the highlighted lines were again in the report table.
Sorry, what was that about the report table?
Oh, sorry. I think we have a bit of latency. So a few people asked what the highlighted lines mean in the report table.
And so these lines in the waterfall, like the yellow. So
yes.
In the waterfall, WebPagetest will color. Okay. So waterfall WebPage colors that come back with a 300 or higher or 3xx response code is yellow, and anything that comes back with a 4xx response code is red. Basically, the reds are errors. If you see any red in your waterfall, and the main reason is you can look at your thumbnail of your waterfall and instantly tell if you have something you should be looking at. If you see any red in your waterfall, go fix it, please. Something's broken. You're getting 404s usually, something along those lines. If you see yellows in the waterfall, sort of classify those as requests the browser shouldn't have had to make necessarily. 301s, 302s for redirects. It's an opportunity to eliminate redirects. in a repeat view 304's cached responses that should have been, the browser shouldn't have had to do a if modified check. Should have been served completely from cache. So usually, and it's AOL Autos and what about their expires headers. Usually what you'll do is you'll see a first view looks pretty clean with very little yellow in it, and then the repeat view, higher yellow expires headers on anything, and every request had to go back to the server and do a validation check.
Okay, and did you talk about the other colors, the green, blue, yellow, and gray line? Well, you did the yellow, I think.
Right, so the yellow is the highlighting. The vertical lines, the blue line is the document complete, the onload event, and the vertical green line is the start render time.
Okay, I think we can move on.
Alrighty. Alrighty, and this is something that's not available in the public instance, but if you stand on of WebPagetest, there's a bulk testing tab where you can put in a bunch of URL to function, and it'll run all of those tests for you, and it'll give you a summary page with the high-level stats, as well as let you results directly, sort of an aggregate CSV if you're doing bulk analysis and that kind of stuff. It's actually not in where you have to. It's coming soon in a code release, thanks to Google. You can either pull from the SVN head or just wait a couple of weeks, and it'll be in the zip file for the private installs, so you can benefit. It's been a huge help for people that want to sort of do bulk URL analysis without having to script against the API. And there is an HTTP API. I don't necessarily encourage using it against the public instance. You can if you get an API key from me, which will let you run, X number of tests a day, kind of a thing. But if you want to build an application that either integrates with your build system or does bulk submission and bulk analysis on the data, there's everything you can do through the UI. You can also do through code through an HTTP REST API, which is all documented. Definitely feel free to ping me if you have any questions about that. The WPTMon, the monitoring system built on top of WebPagetest, also uses the API. And we covered a lot of this. The high priority stuff that's coming soon-ish, as soon as we can get it cranked out. Multi-browser support is definitely huge. Chrome, Firefox, Android, mobile. I can't say enough how important mobile is for us to get to look at. Interesting research done by someone here at Google, Zoe Abrams. There's an above the fold measurement, which is calculations that's done against a video recording to let you know when the above the fold part of the page has finished rendering, which is a lot more useful for the user experience than the onload. Some diagnostic tools. The TCP dumps actually launched a couple of weeks ago, so you can download TCP dumps of your sessions. Trace routes are going to be coming soon. And probably most importantly, since we have pretty wide worldwide usage, it's a shame we have to have everyone consuming it in English, so we're going to be internationalizing the UI and figuring out how we can get it localized, maybe have the community help in localizing the translations. And I think, yep, that was it on the actual presentation. Wanted to finish off any last minute questions.
Yes, we do have some. So let me I'll put it back on your slide. Unless you want to do screen sharing, then just stop sharing here and go back to it. But yeah, so Nicholas asks, what's the average bandwidth we can assume WebPagetest is connecting with? For instance, is it representative of a typical cable modem connection?
So WebPagetest lets you configure arbitrary parameters for the connection. It uses DummyNet for doing the traffic shaping, and we have some pre-configured profiles. The default connectivity, if you don't change anything, is going to look like a 1.5 megabit ADSL line with, I think, either 128K or 384K upstream. But there's also pre-configured profiles for dial-up, and then you can do any arbitrary latency, bandwidth, and packet loss that you'd like.
Okay. Let me make sure I'm not muted. Okay, and then Tim has asked a couple times, what about Silverlight ASP.NET testing?
So you can load Silverlight pages. Where things get complicated is in interacting with the Silverlight application. We have, so, you know, back in my previous life when I used to work at AOL, we had a Silverlight-based mail client where if the application exposes interfaces to JavaScript for automation, then you can use the ability to execute JavaScript to drive the Silverlight application. But as things stand right now, there's no way to like click on an arbitrary part of a screen or enter text into an arbitrary part of a field. But other than that, actually loading an ASP or a Silverlight page is fine, and it'll watch the network activity and it'll wait for the Silverlight app to stop loading network activity, and you can get the waterfall and all that kind of stuff, as well as video. So it's more the interacting where things start to fall apart. And same goes for Flash, actually. It's not just a Silverlight thing.
Okay, people are asking this, so let me just say quickly, yes, this recording is, this webcast is recorded, and we will send the link around to the recording as soon as we have it posted, usually a couple days, so you'll get an email from us. Now let me see, let's see, so Nisha was asking, what are the different performance metrics measured with this tool? That's a rather broad question.
Yeah, so there is a bunch of data collected with each page load. At a high level, you get and there's what's exposed in the UI and friendly data tables, and then if you download the CSV, you get details. But the number of requests, well, obviously the times, the first byte time, the start render time, the onload time, and the time to fully loaded, which is usually until 2 seconds of no network activity after onload. But then you also get number of requests, number of 200 responses, number of 3xx responses, number of 4xx responses, bytes in, bytes out. There's information about the optimization checks, the number of bytes you could save if you gzipped, the number of bytes you could save if you did more detailed image compression. There are some network level stats, the number of TCP retransmits, so you can see if there was any packet loss, at least outbound packet loss during the test, whether you want to filter it out or if you're trying to identify a network problem. Those are some of the high-level stuff. I'm sure there's probably around 40 different fields of data in the data set, so I'm sure I'm missing a fair number of them.
Okay, we have a couple questions from Aaron, who has actually been answering a lot of questions in the chat room, but let's give these a whirl. And I believe you answered this earlier. He's saying, Pat, how about a mobile version of the site? I want to start tests on my mobile phone and check back on the results later. So, oh, he's not saying test mobile, but a mobile version of the site.
Right. So it should. I mean, I've been submitting tests from my iPhone. So everything I've done, like the page width, for example, is optimized even when you're on a desktop browser to be the right width for a mobile phone. It's definitely not mobile optimized, but it should be completely functional on a mobile device. If it's not, please let me know. And
okay.
not a WAP device.
Then Aaron also. Okay. And Aaron had one other question. Do all the test machines have the Silverlight plugin installed?
They should. Once again, if you happen to bump into one that is erroring out because it doesn't, or it doesn't have the version of the Silverlight plugin you need, I think they're up to version 4 now or something like that, just ping me and let me know, and we can, like I said, I only physically run the ones in Dulles, but all of the partners running all of the locations have been great, and it's just a matter of getting onto the box and installing the plugin. By default, we try and have, if not the latest, a very recent version of Flash and Silverlight. Both are the standard plugins we try to run with.
Okay, well, I believe that is it for the questions. You've done a fantastic job answering those. I'm impressed. And I just want to say thank you very much, Pat, for a great webcast.
Oh, and thank you, everyone. It's been great. I can't speak highly enough about the web performance community. And certainly, if you have any follow-up questions, either ping me or go hit the first so everyone can participate in the.
Oh, great! Yes, so great webcast. I really want to thank you, Pat. I know you did this sort of. You had, well, never mind doing it. And we had a great turnout today. What a great audience with wonderful questions and a good discussion. So I really appreciate it. I think everyone enjoyed it. And I just want to say, if you like this kind of content, be sure and check out the Velocity conference coming up later this year. The registration hasn't opened yet, but you can find it online at, let me look that up. It is, one of my guys can post that link, I think, on the O'Reilly Conferences site, Velocity Conference. Not sure we have that. Oh, here, velocityconf.com. So let me get that in there. Thanks, John. You beat me to it. So that's about it. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you'll join us again. And thanks again, Pat. Bye-bye.